Back in 1986, if you had retired with $2 million and started withdrawing $170,000 a year, that's 8.5% of your portfolio, your financial advisor would have called you insane. Every calculator on the internet would have flashed red. The retirement police would have shown up at your door. But here's the thing. If you actually did that, adjusted for inflation every year, kept a balanced portfolio, you'd have made it to 2025 with $21,000 still in the account. You almost perfectly died with zero after 40 years of retirement. Meanwhile, Bob and Susan over here, they listened to their advisor. They did the safe 4% rule. Same starting balance, same time period. They died with $11 million in today's buying power. $11 million they never got to spend. So either Bob and Susan were the world's best savers, or someone got the math catastrophically wrong. Today, I'm going to walk you through what the actual maximum safe withdrawal rate was over the last 40 years, why the 4% rule might be leaving millions on the table, and more importantly, why the answer to this question reveals something deeply broken about how we think about money and risk. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The psychology of retirement planning has almost nothing to do with math, and everything to do with selling you products you don't need. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan, and I only ask for your email to send the report so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. Let me start with a metaphor that's going to carry us through this entire conversation. Think of your retirement portfolio like a car fuel tank, but it's a weird fuel tank because it can magically refill itself while you're driving. Sometimes it refills fast, sometimes slow, sometimes it actually drains faster than you're using it. Your withdrawal rate is how hard you're pressing the gas pedal. Press too hard and you run out of fuel before you reach your destination. Press too softly and you arrive with a full tank. Which sounds great, except you just spent 40 years driving in first gear when you could have been enjoying the ride. The 4% rule says, press the pedal exactly this hard and you'll probably make it. But what they don't tell you is that rule was designed for the absolute worst case scenario. It's like setting your entire driving strategy based on the assumption you'll hit every red light, every traffic jam, and every speed trap on the route. Sure, you'll make it, but at what cost? So let's run the actual numbers, because I spent 10 hours this week backtesting withdrawal rates from 1986 through 2025. I tested 5%, 6%, 7%, and 8% starting withdrawal rates. Two different portfolio allocations. 85% stocks, 15% bonds, then 60% stocks, 40% bonds. The classic balanced portfolio your grandfather probably had. First thing that jumps out. With an 85-15 portfolio starting at 5% withdrawal, you ended with $32 million in future dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's still $11 million in today's buying power. You could have spent more than double and still been fine. At 6%, you still ended with $8 million inflation adjusted. 7%, $4.9 million. Even at 8%, you ended with $1.8 million. The 85-15 portfolio could sustain an 8.58% starting withdrawal rate over 40 years, and you'd end up almost perfectly at zero. Not broke at year 35. Not scrambling at year 38. You'd have coasted the entire 40 years and landed the plane with fumes in the tank. Now, before you start thinking this is some kind of gotcha moment where I'm about to tell you to withdraw 8%, pump the brakes, here's where it gets interesting. And this is the first thing you need to understand about why this number is so high. Sequence of returns. The first 4 years of this backtest, from 1986 to 1990, were absolutely monstrous for stock returns. The portfolio that started at $2 million had jumped to $3.2 million by year 4, even while withdrawing over $100,000 a year. That head start is everything. It's like if you're driving cross country and someone gives you a 50-mile head start. Even if you hit traffic later, you've already built in a buffer. This is why the 4% rule exists. It's designed for people who retire in the worst possible moment. Tech bubble bursting, Great Recession hitting in year 3, lost decade eating your returns. If you retire into that scenario, 4% might actually be aggressive. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody in the financial services industry wants you to ask. What if you don't retire into the worst case scenario? What if you retire into an average scenario or even a good one? Should you still drive in first gear? Let me give you a real example with actual numbers. Let's say you're sitting in 2025 with 2.5 million saved up. You're 55 years old, you want to retire early. The 4% rule says you can safely withdraw $100,000 a year. But you run your actual budget and you realize you need $175,000 a year to live the life you actually want. Travel. Help your kids with a down payment. Not worry about the cost of a nice dinner. The financial advisor runs the calculator and says, sorry, you need 4.4 million to retire. You need to work another 8 years, maybe 10 if markets are flat. So you keep working. You keep grinding. You finally hit that number in 2033. You're 63. You retire. You start traveling. And then you realize you don't have the energy you had at 55. Your knees hurt. You can't hike Patagonia anymore. You can do the cruise ship version, which is fine, but it's not what you wanted. Meanwhile, if you'd looked at the actual data from 1986 to 2025 and adjusted your withdrawal rate based on market conditions, you could have retired at 55 with 2.5 million, withdrawn 175,000 a year, and probably been fine. Not guaranteed, but probably fine. This is where the psychology gets really twisted. Because the financial services industry makes more money the longer you keep working. More years of management fees, more years of contributions. The 4% rule isn't designed to optimize your life. It's designed to minimize the advisor's liability. If they tell you to withdraw 6% and you run out of money at year 37, you sue. If they tell you to withdraw 4% and you die with 5 million unspent, well, your kids are happy. Nobody sues. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Here's the second escalation. Even the 85-15 portfolio I just described is probably too conservative for most people in their 50s and 60s. Look at what happened in 2008. The 85-15 portfolio dropped 30% that year. Absolutely brutal. Your 2 million becomes 1.4 million overnight. But you know what? The portfolio survived. By the end of the 40-year period, even with that crash, even with the tech bubble, even with the lost decade, you still ended up with money left over at an 8.5% withdrawal rate. The 60-40 portfolio, the balanced one that's supposed to protect you, it actually performed worse in 2022 than the aggressive portfolio did in 2008. That was the year we had the triple bear market. Stocks down 20%, bonds down 14%, cash yielding negative after inflation. The safe portfolio dropped almost as much as the risky one. What does that tell you? It tells you that risk is not what you think it is. Everyone obsesses over portfolio allocation. Should I be 60-40 or 80-20? Should I have international exposure? But almost nobody talks about withdrawal rate flexibility. And that's where the real safety is. Think about it this way. If you retire with 2 million and the market crashes 30% in year one, you're down to 1.4 million. If you're rigidly withdrawing 100,000 a year no matter what, you're now withdrawing 7% of a smaller portfolio. That's how you blow up. But if you'd built in flexibility, if you'd planned to withdraw 100,000 in good years and 80,000 in bad years, you just bought yourself a massive buffer. This is where almost everyone gets it wrong. They think the risk is in the stock bond allocation. The real risk is in your ability to adjust spending when markets go sideways. Bob and Susan could have spent way more, lived way better, if they'd just been willing to say, okay, bad year, we'll skip the big Europe trip and do a road trip instead. That flexibility is worth more than any portfolio optimization. Let me tell you about a guy I know who retired in 2009. Absolute worst timing imaginable. Right after the Great Recession. Portfolio was down 40% from its peak. Every calculator said he was screwed. He'd planned for a 5% withdrawal rate. Now he was looking at maybe 3% if he wanted to be safe. You know what he did? He got a part-time consulting gig, 20 hours a week, covered about 40% of his expenses. Did that for 3 years while the market recovered. By 2012, portfolio was back. He quit the consulting gig. He's been retired ever since, spending way more than 4%. Nobody talks about that option. The retirement planning industry treats retirement like a cliff. You're either working full-time or you're fully retired. But that's not how humans actually work. Most people don't want to go from 60-hour weeks to 0 hours immediately. They want to dial it down, do something part-time, consult, teach. But the financial models don't account for that because it's harder to sell you a product if the answer is be flexible and maybe work 10 hours a week if markets tank. Here's a third thing. The 40-year retirement window is arbitrary. It's based on retiring at 65 and living to 105. But most people retire between 60 and 70. Average life expectancy for a 65-year-old male in the US is about 84. For women, it's 87. So you're really planning for a 20 to 25-year retirement for most people, not 40 years. And if you're planning for 25 years instead of 40, your safe withdrawal rate goes up dramatically. I ran the numbers. For a 25-year retirement from 2000 to 2025, the safe max withdrawal rate on an 85-15 portfolio was over 10%. 10%. You could have withdrawn $200,000 a year on a $2 million portfolio and made it the whole way. Now, I can hear some of you saying, but Tom, what about healthcare costs? What about inflation? What about long-term care? All valid, but here's what's interesting. When I talk to retired clients who have been retired for 10 plus years, you know what they tell me? They spend less over time, not more. Travel expenses drop. You stop buying stuff. You've already accumulated everything you need. The only thing that goes up is healthcare. And if you've planned for that separately, your baseline spending actually trends down. There's this weird assumption in retirement planning that you're going to spend the same inflation-adjusted amount every year for 40 years. But that's not how life works. You front-load spending in your 60s and 70s when you're healthy and active. By your 80s, you're spending less because you physically can't do as much. The retirement industrial complex doesn't want you to know this because it means you need less money, which means smaller portfolios, which means lower fees for them. Fourth thing, and this is where we get into the real psychology of money. Most people are not actually optimizing for money. They're optimizing for the feeling of safety. And that's fine, but you need to be honest about it. If you want to die with $5 million because it makes you feel secure, own that. Don't pretend you're being rational or following the data. You're following your anxiety. I've seen this pattern dozens of times in my own business over 10 years. Someone comes to me with $3 million saved, they want to retire, they're spending $80,000 a year. That's a 2.6% withdrawal rate, absurdly safe. They could double their spending and be fine, but they don't want to. Why? Because their parents went through the Great Depression, or they saw their dad lose his job in the 80s, or they just have a scarcity mindset around money. And look, I'm not judging. Your psychology is your psychology, but at least be aware of it. Because if you're working an extra 5 years to get from 3 million to 4 million, and you don't actually need the extra million, you're not being safe. You're being anxious. There's a difference. Here's the mini case study to make this concrete. Let's say you're Mike. You're 58. You have 2.2 million saved. Your annual spending is 120,000. You want to retire now. The 4% rule says you can withdraw 88,000. You're short. You need 2.5 more years of work, maybe 3. But Mike, you own your house outright. You have no debt. Your kids are through college. What's your actual risk here? If you retire today at a 5.5% withdrawal rate, that's 121,000 a year, and markets go sideways for 3 years, worst case, you're down to 1.9 million. At that point, you tighten the belt. Spend 100,000 instead of 120. Or you pick up some part-time work. You're 58. You're not ancient. Compare that to working 3 more years at a job you hate, finally retiring at 61 with 2.5 million, and realizing you just traded 3 years of freedom for an extra $300,000 you probably won't even spend. Which choice do you regret more on your deathbed? This is what I mean by psychology of money. The math says Mike should retire now. The fear says keep working. Most people choose fear, and that's how you end up like Bob and Susan with 11 million unspent. Let me give you the 2 comedic cutaways. First one, imagine you're at a dinner party and someone asks what you do. You say, "Oh, I'm retired." They say, "Wow, how much do you need to retire?" And you say, "Well, I'm spending 8.5% of my portfolio annually, adjusted for inflation, based on a 40-year backtest with an 85-15 allocation." There's an awkward silence. Someone asks if you want more wine. Second cutaway, financial advisor meetings would be so much more honest if they just said, "Look, I'm going to recommend you work 5 extra years, not because you need to, but because if I'm wrong and you run out of money, you'll sue me. But if you die with millions unspent, Your kids will thank me and maybe hire me to manage their inheritance. So my incentive is to be as conservative as possible. Any questions? So let's bring this back to the hook. The real maximum safe withdrawal rate over the last 40 years was 8.58%, not 4%. That's more than double. And while past performance doesn't guarantee future results, the principle stands. The 4% rule is designed for the worst case scenario, and most people don't retire into the worst case scenario. Here are your 3 practical takeaways. First, stop treating your withdrawal rate like a fixed number. Build in flexibility. In good years, spend more. In bad years, spend less. That flexibility is worth more than any portfolio optimization. Second, consider your actual time horizon. If you're retiring at 65, you're planning for 20 to 25 years, not 40. That changes the math significantly. You can safely withdraw more over a shorter period. Third, separate your psychology from the math. If you want to die with money because it makes you feel safe, that's valid. But don't confuse that emotional need with financial necessity. Be honest about whether you're optimizing for security or for the life you actually want to live. I've been investing for over 10 years. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in the market. I've read more SEC filings and tax code than any human should. And here's what I've learned. The people who die with the most money are rarely the happiest. The people who figure out how to spend at the right rate, who balance today with tomorrow, who understand their own psychology, those are the ones who look back with no regrets. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes, but knowing when to actually spend that fortune, that's the real skill nobody teaches you. The system wants you to save forever and spend never, because that's how they maximize fees. Your job is to figure out your actual number, your actual risk tolerance, your actual goals, and ignore everything else. Most of you watching this could safely withdraw more than you think. The question is whether you have the guts to do it.